Hello, everybody, and welcome to another episode of BHBA Family Law Presents Direct Examination with Dan and Lauren. Along with Lauren Youngman from Youngman Reichstein, I'm Dan Bemmel, financial advisor and certified divorce financial analyst. During each episode of our show, we'll explore our guest's personal and professional history and dig into a meaningful legal topic. Please continue to join us for our upcoming episodes, always at 12:30 p.m. live on Zoom. Judge Amy Pellman on March 2nd, Ron Brote on April 6th, Dan Jaffe on May 4th, Alexander Leichter on June 1st, and Kendra Thomas and Gina Kang, the BHBA Family Law Section leaders, on July 6th. The links are already up on the bar's event calendar and will be available in the chat box. Lauren.
Thank you, Dan. Good afternoon, everyone. You will receive your MCLE certificate shortly after the program. Please take a moment to complete the survey that's included with your certificate. The Family Law section is sponsored by White, Zuckerman, Warsofsky, Luna, and Hunt, and Our Family Wizard. White, Zuckerman, Warsofsky, Luna, and Hunt provides a wide variety of resources to complete almost any project, large or small. They also provide traditional accounting and tax practice services. We invite you to contact them to discuss your specific accounting needs and learn how they can be of service to you. Our Family Wizard is a secure co-parenting platform that supports divorced or separated parents in managing the daily responsibilities of raising children. Specialized features help co-parents organize routines, share files, track expenses and payments, check in and exchanges, send messages, and more, all while thoroughly documenting their activity. All right, Dan, you can go ahead and get started.
Okay, thanks, Lauren. Today, we welcome Larry Ginsberg. Larry is the co-founder of Harriet Ginsberg and specializes in the representation of high net worth individuals in high conflict situations while also being mediation friendly. Among his many professional honors and associations, Larry is a fellow of both the AAML and the IAFL. He's the past president of the Harriet Buhai Center for Family Law and is currently the chair of the board of directors of Everybody Dance LA, which focuses on transforming lives and communities through the power of dance. Larry, welcome, and thanks for joining us.
Thank you. Thank you guys for having me. I appreciate it.
All right, well, let's dig in. Some of the things that I like most about spending time with you, Larry, is your optimism and positivity, especially in this world. I think it's pretty contagious. So let's start by trying to figure out where that came from. So tell us a little bit about young Larry. What was it like growing up in Madison? And tell us a little bit about where you think that came from.
I have always been a glasses half full kind of person. Don't know why. My upbringing in Madison was, without being overly dramatic, a little tumultuous. Parents divorced when I was 6. My sister, who's 16 months older than I, we kind of raised ourselves after age 6 and 7. Mother alcoholic, father workaholic. The good news being, if there's good news, I adopted the workaholism pattern and not the alcoholism pattern. So that kind of started me at an early age on the path of working hard and generally being optimistic. I'm very even keeled, notwithstanding what some of my colleagues might say at certain points in time. And I think that comes from a relatively rocky upbringing. It takes a lot to rattle me. It takes a lot to kind of push me off my game. And I think that's because I'm pretty good at prioritizing things that really matter. And I think that comes from my childhood being in Madison, being with my family. And I just feel like, if you're going to, what's the old adage? It's easier to laugh than to cry. Sometimes laughing or being positive and having that good energy, I think it just carries through really well in life, both in personal and professional relationships.
Were you always planning on becoming a lawyer?
No, that wasn't, I'm not one of those people who grew up in a family of lawyers or, saying I've always wanted to be a lawyer. I did my undergrad in Madison. My father was the dean of students there while I was a student there. And I was in the School of Social Work, spent a lot of time developing, kind of my view of the world, being surrounded by strong women in the School of Social Work, and with my father, who was very kind of education focused, and grew into the desire to go to law school through my experience in social work, through some internship work with the public defender's office, and thought that I could have a greater impact on individuals. I wasn't quite so grandiose as to think I could have a greater impact on society necessarily, but certainly on individuals by going to law school. And so once I finished my undergrad, I started thinking about that at that time and thinking, where do I want to be geographically? I was ready to get out of Madison at that point after I'd been born and raised there and going to school there. And law school seemed like a good alternative.
And what was your law school experience like? Did you immediately start thinking about practicing family law? What was the path there?
I wanted something very different than my undergrad experience. My undergrad experience, Madison, liberal bastion of the Midwest, 45,000 students at the university, kind of a very broad-based population, diverse. And so I came out to Pepperdine in Malibu, not just because they offered me enough money to make it affordable. That was some of the consideration, but also because it's a small, the undergrad campus at the time was religious based, the law school not so much for AALS and ABA purposes, but I wanted a different experience. And when I drove up to Malibu in my 1976 rusted out Mercury Capri, I realized I was going to have a very different experience. All the other kids are driving Mercedes and BMWs and everything else, and I'm there basically barely making it up the hill to the school. But I immediately fell in love with the campus, because what's not to love about Pepperdine and Malibu? But more importantly, I fell in love with the people there, with the student body, met some great people, and some of whom had experience doing some clerkship work and internship work in family law. So that's kind of what started, that integration into that part of my career.
So before we move into your family law career, tell us a little bit more about the social work piece of it. What did you take with you from that experience, and did that color your decision on going to law school or not?
It colored my decision on going to law school, to take the last issue first, the last question first, because I felt like working, and again, most of my work experience in social work was in internships and with the public defender's office. I felt like there was a way to shape policy, or a way to get more integrated into the dynamic that existed beyond just the individual, that could be managed better with a law degree. And I'm happy to say most of that has borne fruit. Most of that has proven true over the years. But it wasn't like I wanted to go to law school specifically, as a furtherance of social work. But I think social work, and what I learned in social work, and also the fact that social work resonated with me. It's the kind of thing where I found a path that really worked for me. I loved the dynamic. I loved, dealing with the didactic relationships and how people interacted with each other. In human nature, I say to this day, it's like I love my work, because every day I'm shocked. Every day I'm surprised, good, bad, or ugly, about human nature and what human nature is and what it does to people. So carrying that through into law school, from what I learned from social work and human interaction, not only I think helped me again in my personal relationships and kind of working through the transition from Madison to Pepperdine, but very much kind of has resonated in the path of family law and in bringing to bear kind of the social work principles and the interactive principles, and again, that didactic relationship that I think permeates every conversation I have in family law, whether with clients or with colleagues.
So any other experiences, any other key experiences in your early work life before you went in?
Before I went in?
Yeah, to law school.
I had, moments. I think everyone has those kind of pivotal moments. I remember when my dad was the dean, and I was a senior, I think, in undergrad, and walking down the Lakeshore Path in Madison, which, if anyone's been to Madison, it's kind of the most magical experience. I love it. Go back as often as I can. And during the fall, it's extraordinary. walking with my father, and my father talking about what I wanted to do and where I wanted to go. My father was always very supportive of whatever I wanted to do. At that time, I'd been doing some musical theater, and he's like, maybe you should try that if that's a passion. Go to New York. But I had a conversation about I wished it was enough. I wish it felt like it was enough for me to stay in Madison and be a social worker. I wish that felt more satisfying and more full and more complete. And his response to me, I'll never forget this. He looked at me, stopped, got very serious. My father was a very serious guy. Stopped and looked at me and said, well, thank God it's not enough. Thank God you want to do more. Thank God there are more things in your passion and your interests which take you somewhere else. So he just wanted me to be fulfilled. So that was kind of that pivotal moment where I started thinking about law school, thinking about and I took some time off after undergrad, like 8 months or so, which helped me kind of solidify, who I was. So one of the issues I always have with undergrad and talking to people who are undergrad, or God forbid, even in high school, who feel pressure to figure out what they're going to do and who they are and what their passions are. I'm like, you're barely a fully formed human being at that point. You should listen to what the world tells you and your interaction with the world and others in the world. So that was one of those moments that really kind of pushed me in that direction.
So after law school, we know you ended up at Trowe. How did you end up there?
I started actually in my second year of law school as a law clerk there. I had met a couple people. There was actually a law clerk when I was starting out at Trowe. When I was like I'm in court. There was a person a student at Pepperdine named Bev Tiffany, who was an intern or a clerk with Trowe at the time. She had a similar background in social work. And we had a long talk one day at Pepperdine, and she said, you should think about applying to Trowe to do family law. I'm clerking there. I love it. Good people. And so she kind of turned me on to that, to what Trowe was. I had just, full disclosure, come off a year working on a cruise ship. I took a year off of law school to work on a cruise ship, and had talked with some people while I was on the ship, because part of my job, I was an entertainer. I'm outing myself as a former singer dancer. But part of my job was social staff, and I'd go to these parties on this cruise ship, which is called the Royal Viking Sky. And I would talk to all these, at the time, old guys who are now like my age. And I talked to them about the practice of law, and I'm taking up a law school, and I'm going to go back. And almost to a person, and this really has shaped a lot of my thought process going forward, almost to a person, the lawyers would say, don't go back. Don't leave the cruise ship life, don't go back. And I'd explore with them why. And a lot of them, I'm happy to say this isn't true about a lot of my colleagues in family law, a lot of them hated what they were doing. And in my 24-year-old mind at the time, like, well, why do you do it? Why are you spending your time, and your life and your energy and your passion doing something that you're not really excited about doing? And I promised myself then and there, and I'm getting off track, but I promised myself then and there, I would always have the ability to wake up every morning, kind of check myself and say, is this still something I'm happy doing? Is it still a place I'm happy working? Is it still a field I'm passionate about? And I would hope that if I ever do wake up one day and say, not so much, that I'd have the wherewithal to kind of figure out where to transition from there. But that was the introduction kind of, in my pre-Trope days, knowing as I was going to integrate into a real life, a professional life, that I always had that mindset. And
what were you doing when you first started at Trowe?
I was hired.
What was when they threw you in the fire, what was the first things?
Well, the fire was something different than what I planned at the time. I was hired by Gene Trowe, who was Sorrell's brother. May they both rest in peace. He was Sorrell's older brother. And I was hired. Gene was kind of a diverse lawyer, had a lot of different practices, a lot of different interests. And at the time he was representing, I don't know how many people remember this, but the Twilight Zone movie where the helicopter crashed and a couple kids were killed, and Vic Morrow, the actor, was killed by the helicopter. And Gene Trowe was representing the helicopter pilot, whose name, which I always remember because it's so appropriate, was Dorsey Wingo. Dorsey Wingo. No idea.
Perfect.
Right name. But I remember, not to digress further, but if people had ever been to Trowe offices, before they went away. It was all very, beautiful shades of beige and blue and calming and very professional and old style photographs that Sorrel collected on the walls. When you walked into Jean's office, which is in one corner, there was one picture, I'll never forget this, one image on the wall outside the office, and it had a red border. Unlike every other picture in the office of the red border, you open the door to Jean's office and red carpet, mirrored walls, massive fish tank against the wall. And I'll never forget this as a 20, whatever I was, 24-year-old, sitting there at the desk, and Jean had this massive kind of like wing desk, sitting there with Jean, who looked like Colonel Sanders, and he had a big black porcelain or other material horse head sitting on his desk. And I remember sitting there and having this interview, Jean, and trying to be all professional, and all I'm thinking to myself is, don't look at the horse, don't look at the horse, don't look at the horse. It's like, I'm listening to him, but kind of not, because I'm so nervous. I'm just gonna don't look at this horse. But that's what brought me into Trope and Trope. I worked with it on the Dorsey Wingo case, and then I started meeting and integrating, more of the people there, and obviously their focus is and always was family law, and that's what kind of got me interested and got me integrated into it.
Okay, and so as you grew into the job, what was it like working then with Sorrel instead of Jean?
I loved it. I loved it. Sorrel and Jean, very, very different lawyers, people, but they both instilled a great sense of loyalty in people. Of course, as a younger lawyer, I was in awe of both of them, particularly in awe of Sorrel because of who he was, and the gravitas and the history and the intellect and the abilities, the courtroom abilities. And so I was very kind of awestruck by the whole thing. It was a small firm, relatively small firm then. I think we had maybe 8 associates and 2 or 3 partners, they, and just knew from the beginning, under the stewardship of people at the time like Gary Cohen, Carol Cohen, Bruce Cooperman, the kind of the senior associate or junior partner kind of folks, Stephen Knowles, may he rest in peace, who really kind of would guide me on how to manage and kind of maneuver through the workings of the firm, always knowing this is Sorrel's firm, it's Sorrel's shop, and this is the guy I want to learn from. And not to fast forward, but then I was there as a law clerk, then 7 years as an associate, 3 years as a partner. And as my relationship grew with Sorrel, as my relationship grew with the community through Sorrel, and I remember back in the day of walking into Department 2, which was the master calendar department at the time, and walking up to the front before I got assigned out, I remember saying, good morning, Your Honor, Larry Ginsberg from Trope and Trope, and all the heads turned, because everyone wanted to know who's the new kid at Trope and Trope, what's going on at Trope and Trope. So many of us, as you guys know, have walked through those hallowed halls and worked through those hallowed halls. But I viewed Sorrel as a father figure in a certain sense, as a mentor in every sense, and just wanted to kind of soak up from that experience, good, bad, or ugly, because there were ugly moments that he and I had with each other. He might not have viewed them that way. I viewed them as a lethal combination of ugly and terror. But I learned from it all, and I became, a much, much better lawyer, a much better practitioner as a result. And I also carried through some of that gravitas, because I was now this, puffed out chest associate at Trope and Trope. I carried a certain mantle with that, which I appreciate.
Well, just like that story when you made your first appearance in Department 2, are there any cases or specific anecdotes that still stick with you from those early days becoming an associate?
So many, and we don't have time for them all, so I'll just kind of whip through a couple if I may. As a lot of people who worked at Trope know, we'd have Monday meetings, we'd go through, creating a trial box and what a trial was all about. And, the Sorrel's mantra, it's very simple. What do you want to prove and how are you going to prove it? Sorrel's focus on the rules of evidence. Sorrel's focus on the ability to sell a story and to tell a story in court. He was just a master of that. I'm so sorry for all the people who never got to experience that and seeing him in person, whether it was as a opposing counsel or a co-counsel or an associate or partner, whatever. He was just that brilliant practitioner on so many levels. But then there'd be the days when, as a young associate, he had this office, and you'd get a call, Larry, come see me. And I always put my jacket on. You had to have your jacket on at Trowe and Trowe when you walked around, and the tie and everything else. And I'd walk into the office, and I knew I was in trouble if he'd be sitting there behind the desk. He'd pull this little side tray out. And I can see that a piece of work that I've done is sitting on the side tray that's got red all over it, just all over it. He's like, pull up a chair. I'm like, man. And I'm trying to think, this is good. This is a learning experience, but you just never knew what was going to happen. And he would, he'd show me something, why is this here? What's your point of writing it this way? What does that work? Where does that get you? What does it accomplish? And just soaking that up, it was a bit terrifying, but you'd walk out, you'd say, okay, survived another one of those, and you'd learn from it. You'd always learn from it. And fast forward, well, there was one moment, if I may digress for a second, and I was I think a law clerk at a little windowless office, and was just getting to know Sorrel, getting to know the firm, and Sorrel comes into my office, which was literally the size of a postage stamp. And he said, what are you doing Saturday night? And I was a law clerk. I'm like, I'm doing whatever you want me to do. My girls are going to a Howard Jones concert. I'll never forget this. I need you to chaperone them. And I'm like, all right, law clerk duty, I'm on it. But the good news, two stories. The good news is it's the first ride I ever had in a limousine. So that was fun. And the bad side being I never knew how shrill and awful it was to hear teenage girls screaming at a high pitch. So I learned that. But one other anecdote, if I may, we had a big trial up in Haley, Idaho. We were representing a woman, and it was a custody case. It was about a move to Haley or staying in LA, and basically a move away. And I was up there, we were staying at the Sun Valley Lodge, and all very glamorous and beautiful, whatever else. Well, Sorrel would get up, and he and I would get up every morning at 5 o'clock. We'd take a walk together, talk about the day, talk about the strategy, talk about the plans. So it's beautiful, it's bucolic. It's literally one of those moments where walking over this field, the mist is rising, the sun is coming up, and there's a beautiful herd of horses over in the field. It's just so, and I remember stopping, I touched his arm and said, while we're planning what's happening in the law in the case, just take a moment, let's breathe, let's look at this. And his response, if I may speak bluntly, his quote was, look at them assholes like they have nothing better to do about the horses. And I'm thinking to myself, okay, well, I'm never doing that again. Those kinds of things. That's how he was. He just, he was how he was who he was. And you learn from the good, bad, and the ugly, but you always learn. One way or the other, you always learn.
One of the things that you mentioned almost in passing is how many people went through there, including so many of the guests that we've had on our show over the last year. What did you learn about mentoring that you took from Sorrel, that you try to apply now that it's your firm?
We had a bit of a roast for Sorrel years ago, and I couldn't be at the actual event because I had some other stuff going on, but I did an interview of him on video, and we talked about this. We talked about the kinds of things. I was the interviewer, and I was interviewing Sorrel, but the kinds of things that I learned from him about mentorship and running a firm and these kinds of things, because at that time I had my firm. And the role I mentioned earlier, Sorrel was big on loyalty. He was big on knowing people had his back. And one of the things I learned from him, as he was my mentor for so many years, was that engendering the ability in others, whether it's colleagues, whether it's co-counsel, whether it's younger lawyers in particular, engendering the confidence and the ability to walk into a room and own the position, own the presentation. And even if you're not on the right side of things, even if there are legal issues against you, factual issues against you, figuring out a way to kind of be that person and present in as positive way, obviously within certain parameters, as possible. I cannot stress enough how the mentoring that Sorrel provided to me and others at the firm. There are others, Bruce Cooperman is, I consider, a mentor. If he's watching, I'll deny having said it, but Bruce is a mentor, one of the smartest guys I know. Steve Knowles, may he rest in peace. I mean, these are really solid, good practitioners who know how to create the story, know what to present, and know how to do it with detail and with specificity. And that mentoring and that passing that along, one of the things we talked about, Dan and Lauren, as we were kind of talking about this presentation today was kind of, and I hope I'm not stepping on toes and raising this, but how you pass that along to other people. Yeah. And that mentorship, to the extent that I have anything to add to the conversation at all, is to say to younger people, having that confidence, it's not always, the smartest guy in the room. It's not always the best pedigree. It's not always where you went to school and where you placed in your school. It's about not just instilling confidence in your clients, but in your colleagues, doing so respectfully, knowing that this, however you manage yourself and present yourself, and again, this is due to Sorrell, from my perspective and my growing up in the law, how you present yourself will carry through. How you manage that relationship will carry through, the respect that you get. When there was a bar meeting or something, and one of our senior colleagues, whom will go unnamed, came up to me and I said, "Hey, great to see you," whatever. And he said, apropos of your comment, Dan, about I tend to be fairly positive and glass half full. He said to me, "Why are you all so upbeat? Why are you all so friendly?" Because we've gone head to head and had some issues with each other, whatever. And I said, "That's not, the profession and the relationships in the cases and in the courtroom and otherwise. That's an important, very important dynamic to represent our clients, and we all represent our clients well, hopefully. But that's not who we are as people necessarily." And I really enjoy, and I can say this with a great sense of honesty and integrity, after doing this for 35 some years, whatever the total has been, I stopped counting. I like most of my colleagues. I enjoy most of my colleagues. I respect most of my colleagues. The vast, vast majority of them who are doing what they can do and doing the best with what they have. They didn't, like my cases, I didn't create the facts I have. They don't create the facts they have. Obviously, there are people who we believe may push boundaries, legal, ethical, or otherwise. But it's a very, very small group of people. And I know I'm kind of digressing, but when you talk about the mentoring and what we can do and what Sorrell gave to me and that gift to pass that on, to carry it forward, play it forward, so to speak, that's the best we can do with it.
So we heard a bit about what it was like as a new associate and also as a law clerk. What was your experience like being a partner at Sorrell before we shift gears to another topic?
The joke, that's the wrong term. It was largely form over substance. This was Sorrell's firm. There was no question it was Sorrell's firm. I wanted to be a partner. I became a partner. I remember the Christmas party where he announced it. And, but it was largely form over substance. It was a pay increase. Everyone had kind of different relationships with Sorrell and kind of how that would be managed. It was integral to where I wanted to be at a certain point in time because of my respect for Sorrell and that firm, and I wanted to be a partner there. But my position there didn't change from the Friday I was an associate to the Monday when I was a partner. Everyone whom I know, and I know to our prior discussion, there are a lot of people who've been through there. Ann Kiley, a very good friend, was there till the very end, and I think Ann would agree with me. I know she was on your program as well. We all grew a lot with that, but that partnership associate thing, it was a title, and it wasn't necessarily a change in the format or the function in the firm.
Let's talk a little bit about another, key aspect of your professional growth, and that's working at the Buhai Center. How did you first get involved? What did you really take away from that experience or your time there?
Well, let me just say, first of all, I know you had Betty Nordwind, executive director, on your show and your podcast. And I think everyone who's watching this should go back and watch that because it's, I think, a fascinating interview. Of course, I'm
available on YouTube like everything else that we've done. Thank you.
It's a plug-in.
Yeah, there you go. Exactly. Thanks, Larry. Yeah, perfect.
Yeah.
Perfect.
You're welcome.
Well done.
Open the door for you, walk right through it. I love that.
Yeah, well done. Well done.
Yeah. I'm a huge fan of Betty, have been for decades. I was introduced to the Buhai Center by a couple of associates at Trowe, then associates at Trowe, a woman named Carolyn Kozik, now Carolyn DeFrancesco, Deborah Ewing, both of whom were volunteering at the time, and got to know them very well. And as they got to know me better and knew about my social work background and these kinds of things, and that I wasn't just is the wrong word. I wasn't on a path of wanting to be necessarily the divorce lawyer to the rich and famous. That wasn't my agenda, even though it was a lot of my experience because of my Trowe experience. I also wanted to experience the other side, excuse me, experience what's happening with people and the lives of people and the process of people who could not afford to walk through the doors of Trowe. And Carolyn and Deb suggested I start volunteering at the Buhai Center, and I fell in love with it. It was like walking back into some of my social work days, some of the get your hands dirty and figure out what this process is. I have advocated for 35 years that if people who are new in this practice want to learn the nuts and bolts of how to best kind of develop the broad-based understanding of how this process works, volunteer at the Buhai Center. Or at the very least, buy their manual, another plug, because that manual of what's the petition, carrying through to the judgment, what happens in default, what is an FL 150, which wasn't called that at the time. That structure, while I was doing well at Trowe and loving the work, there were a lot of holes to fill in that you may not be getting as an associate or a clerk or even a young partner at some of these firms. Sole practitioners, I think, do a much better job of it, Frank, because they have had to learn these things. They had to learn the things that I hadn't learned. So I go to Buhai, I start volunteering. I spoke Spanish, so I was doing a lot of Spanish work, and then I realized I didn't speak Spanish well enough to understand a lot of the vernacular, a lot of the very important conversations about domestic violence and other issues. But I stuck with it in an English-speaking role as a volunteer. Betty wasn't there when I started. Betty and I go back and forth about how long she's been there, how long we've known each other. But when I met Betty, I met the reincarnation of my grandmother, who used to raise money for the Milwaukee Jewish Federation, and immediately fell in love. We've been close friends ever since, still are. And the counterbalance of working as a volunteer at the Buhai Center, understanding the lives of people and what real people, people who are at or below the poverty line, making $400, $500 a month and raising 3 children, and the difficulties they had in going through the divorce process or the domestic violence process. I mean, to this day, well, pre-pandemic, I would see pro pers in court sometimes, and I would experience what they went through in court. I would follow them out into the hallway and say, I know this is so hard for you. Call the Buhai Center, or call Levitt and Quinn, or call Betsedic, or these organizations are there to help you. But it was such a great counterbalance for me to have that continuing experience working with these people and in these cases, and then go back into my big shiny office or my shiny office at Trowe and realized 2 things. Number one, that you're kind of applying the same factors and discussions no matter who you're dealing with. But number 2, to always be aware and grateful that you have the ability, and I would say this to people many times over the years about when I would hit people up for money from the Buhai Center, that if we don't support someplace like the Buhai Center or Levitt and Quinn or Betsedic, but my heart was with the Buhai Center, this is an obligation that we have as part of this community. If we have the rarefied and I think great experience of being able to help people and facilitate people in their process and be paid for it, I think we have a duty to give back and to do so in a way that specifically and in a broad-based way, I think resonates with the family law community. And the Buhai did that for me.
So these 2 paths, trope and the center, if those are the foundational elements of you as an attorney, when did you feel prepared to step out and start your own firm? And what was it like? How did you actually make that move? I'm
still not sure I'm prepared to step out and start. There was a moment. I'm going to digress to the interactions with Sorrel again for one moment.
Yeah.
We had a very, very, very difficult case, very difficult, high-profile case. And if a certain lawyer who was on this side is watching, he'll know exactly what case I'm talking about. And sitting in Sorrel's office one day, And he stood up, and I knew this wasn't good because he was standing up. And we had a conversation about some things that had gone on, and he and I were kind of butting heads about some strategy and some process. And I remember sitting there thinking, as he was so angry and so, classic, really, really angry Sorrel that I'd seen maybe 5 times in 10, 12 years. All I could think of, I'm not even listening to him at this point. All I could think of is, oh my God, I'm about to kill Sorrel. He's about to have a heart attack because he is yelling at me so vigorously and with such amazing energy. But that was kind of a turning point. And I thought, I may have come to a point where I can do this in a way that I can own and appreciate and will resonate with me better than being an associate / partner at Trowe. And I say that with all great love and respect for Sorrel. It wasn't like I needed to get away from Sorrel or Trowe. I needed to start something different and see if that path would work. And thank God, Suzanne Harris, who was a partner at the time, and I were very people who know us. We are very different people. We kind of came to that discussion and understanding at the same moment. Let's see if we can do that. We went to Gilliland's restaurant in Santa Monica. We sketched out the letterhead, which is still the letterhead. Suzanne's now retired. But there was never a moment of, I can't do this, but there was always a moment of, will it work? And my back to my comment about, if you want to change things, it's up to you to change them. Walking out that door and starting Harris Ginsberg was the greatest thing I've done professionally, the most satisfying thing I've done professionally. And really, to the credit of Sorrel and the mentorship, without that, I would not have become the lawyer, the person I was, that allowed me to do that. And he and I talked about that many times over the years after I left, after we formed this firm, about my gratitude to him for making me and helping me be the lawyer and the person who could accomplish what I believe we've accomplished.
And so when you finally pulled the trigger and founded your firm, what were those early days like?
I feel like I should say they were terrifying, but they weren't. They were
well, that's good.
They were uncertain. I still have my handwritten business plan. I still have the first application for a credit line, which weirdly, and thank God I'm knocking wood, we never used. But it's like, the phrase, if you build it, they'll come. We built it and they came. It was surprising. I'll never forget the first time I put in my time in the computer, literally the first moment of putting in my own time, and boom, there it appears. I have billed time for myself in my firm, and there's the first entry. And you think, okay. And of course, like being in business for oneself, there are ups and downs and these kinds of things. But it was gratifying from the very start. I'm not an entrepreneur at heart. And this is not something like I started out, like I didn't start out saying, I want to go to law school. I didn't start out saying, I want to use Trowe as a launching pad to build something on my own. It was very organic as far as that developed, with the right people, at the right time, at the right moment, with the right energy. And I'm just going to say, with all due humility or lack thereof, having built this firm now into 17 lawyers and for over 25 years, it'll be 26 in June, creating this environment and creating this, the context of the work we do together as a team. A lot of it I learned from Trowe. I just want to digress for a second. I have huge respect for all the sole practitioners out there who manage this, go on the listserv, do whatever, and do this very, very difficult practice in a way that works for them. Because I've always had a team. I've always had Trowe, and then I've always had Harris Ginsberg. I've always had this automatic brain trust around me to help me think through problems and whatever else. I so respect people who have done this on their own or with one or two other people as to how you manage the many, many, many hurdles that are in this practice. But we never looked back. I mean, we started with myself and Suzanne, and then Andrea Balian joined us, and Pam Summers and Fahi. And, I'm happy to say that the core group of people of the 17 have all been together for most of those 25 years. And I still, if I may digress for a second, I was sitting with Sorrel and Linda, his wife, at Steve Knowles's memorial after he passed. And Linda said, I miss the old days. And I don't think I'm speaking out of school. There are other people with us, so not private conversation necessarily. She said, I miss the old days, which was something, the gravitas of trope and trope or whatever. And I remember I touched her hand and Sorrel actually took my hand in a very moving moment. I have goosebumps thinking about it. And I said, well, thank God we had the old days. Thank God we had that experience all together coming through to this. I would hope that for younger lawyers today, or even middle range, or whatever, I've been doing this, whatever, again, for 30 some years, I would hope that everybody has that moment of being grateful for the experience you've had and what you've built up and how it has brought you to the experience you're having now. And I mean to be all touchy-feely on you, but that's what I want.
Oh, we love that. We love
No,
that.
that's great. And I think that's a good segue, because we've talked a lot about the cultures in these different places and how you've built it at your firm. But I want to zoom out a little bit and talk about the world in which you've been operating for the last 30 plus years. I mentioned at the top that you've taken leadership roles in a number of the professional organizations, and you've written and thought a lot about the legal system as a whole. So let's talk a little bit about your philosophy and your thoughts on family law and the practice itself. So in that pivot, let's start by talking about the divorce process. How do you look at that, and how do you look at your role as an advocate, helping people go through that process?
It's such a, the term advocate, I'm glad you used that word. It's such a unique experience in family law. And I know I'm preaching the choir on every family law practitioner or person out there who's listening, who knows, what this practice is about. Steve Kolodny was always very clear. We have one boss, and that boss is our client. We work for our clients. But we have these discussions all the time. We also work for the children. We work for the families. We work for the respect of the process. We work for the respect of the relationship and the history. And the advocacy role sometimes just, is going to come up right up against the other roles that we play as practitioners, whether it's for the benefit of the children, whether we always go through those, mental gymnastics of advocacy for a client, which advocacy, if it's done in a myopic way, is that really in the best interest of these kids? Is it really in the best interest of getting these people through a process that we know can be very difficult? I happen to believe very clearly after this many years that the way our court system is built and family law are the wrong mix. I'm a litigator. I've been a litigator for years. I work with that system. I know how that system works to a certain extent. I have my down days, God knows. And I really, really respect and appreciate the people who litigate, advocate for their clients, for the judicial officers who take impossible decisions, and they make them anyway because they have to, because it's their job, and they do the best they can with what they have, even if they know that things could be different or should be different. But that system in advocating for a client, I'm a fan of saying the trial process means you failed. It is a necessary evil. I'm a fan of due process. I'm a fan of the evidence code. I'm a fan of everyone having access to the courts, et cetera. I'm not a fan of divorce files being public, but that's a whole separate discussion. I just don't think it's anyone else's business. But I'm a fan of knowing what that process is. But I truly believe, and I think that there are a lot of colleagues out there who join me in this, that again, I'll sound less than humble, we're smart people. We know what the issues are. We know where the discretion lies. We know about the rules and the law and the history, and you can do a statutory, you can do whatever you want to do and present, but that doesn't necessarily mean that's in the best interest of your client. And so as an advocate, I always want to counsel my client about, number one, realistic expectations. Number two, I have been known to have a client go sit with one of my associates or, with other people or on their own in court, because they have a view of what that's going to be. And it's very different when you're sitting down there. So if they think it's a Perry Mason moment that's about to happen, let's talk about what that looks like. And let's talk about, as a lot of our retired judicial officer types or mediator types like to say, let's talk about taking some control of that. And maybe that advocacy means advocating for the right outcome, whatever that means, and not necessarily the best outcome. if you win, and the fees and everything else. So I realize that's a convoluted answer to your question, Dan. But to me, the world we're living in the context of advocacy and family law, is a world where we have to be creative. We have to be thoughtful. And that's even pre-COVID. During COVID, all the more so. We need to be thinking about productive ways to bring our clients to a positive resolution, so that in 5 years, they wake up and they say, that process sucked, that whole divorce thing, but at least I got through it with a sense of humanity and respect, and I can sleep well. Not just because I ground someone down to nothing.
So if going to trial is a failure, then what do you see as a success going through the divorce process?
I know I'll hear from people about saying going to trial is a failure. I again do think going to trial can be a necessary part of the process, because we all, there was a judge once who said, who will go unnamed, she's now retired, who said, basically, I don't understand why you people can't figure this out. And I remember saying to her, well, it's good for you that we can't, because otherwise you'd have nothing to do. But sometimes we just can't. So I get that. I totally get that. But I view I view success as early intervention in a case, getting with opposing counsel. And I know some of my colleagues out there might think, well, yeah, Larry, you talk a good story, but not so much in reality, because I fail on this as well as anybody does. But I think having the early intervention, the discussions about the issues, not going crazy, just not going crazy, back to my kind of even keel kind of thing. I have a short list of lawyers who, if a potential client says to me, I want scorched earth, and I want this, and I want that, and it's got to be beating the chest and all that kind of stuff. I said, well, I may not be the lawyer for you. Call one of these folks. You may feel better about parts of the process. You will probably get a worse result, and I'm sure you're going to spend a lot more money in fees, but please go over there. Sometimes they come back to me, ultimately, sometimes they don't. But that the success, to answer your question, Lauren, is about taking the facts and the dynamic that exists, understanding it, trying to work with it, knowing the frailty of the relationship, knowing the baggage that everyone brings. And this goes back to my social worker days. So there we are, of understanding that relationship and how it works and working with that in a productive way. It is such a hard process. And I'm preaching to the choir on family law practitioners and others who know this business and know this practice. When you're dealing with the client and the difficulties, the opposing counsel and the difficulties, the process and the courts and the difficulties that are made because of the nature and the overwhelming burden, it's a lot to manage. It's a lot of moving parts. So take a deep breath, sit back, and the creativity is the success. The creativity where a client understands, I may not be getting 100% of everything I could possibly get after a 5-week trial, but I'm getting the certainty of knowing what to do with this. And I always say to people, the tools available to the judge and what a judge can order, God love them, are limited. The tools available to us as to what we can create in a settlement dynamic, giving enforceability and giving, whatever the default is to the extent someone doesn't comply. Let's build that into the process, build that into the agreement. That, to me, Lauren, is a success.
So if creativity is success and trial is something on the spectrum of going to trials can be seen as a failure, what are your prescriptions to systemically incentivize those outcomes or to push people in the right direction? How would you change some of the core tenets of what we've been doing to promote those values?
Some people who are listening will remember something called Family Court 2000, which in the late 1990s was a discussion a lot of us had about, or that was had amongst many practitioners and professionals in the bench, about how we can change things. It kind of fell apart in discussions about a 2-tier system and access to justice and those kinds of things. In the context of recreating the animal that exists and the tools, there's Family Code section 2450. 2451 talks about case management and what the court can order and orders that a court can make. I think early intervention in this process with a 2450 or 2451 motion, hopefully by stipulation, but you still need the court's leave to do it because it's a lot of work for the court. And so we have budgeting issues and workload issues and all those kinds of things. I realize that, but something that puts teeth into the process whereby if people act a certain way, and by people, I mean family lawyers, in the process, there have to be some teeth. There has to be some, and we all have the sanctions, the 471 or 271 or, the other sanctions that are available under the code, Feldman kind of motion. Those kinds of things are important. But I want to create a process. I want to think about and talk about creating a process whereby that management, there's early intervention, there's management somehow controlled through some of our older or retired colleagues. By older, I mean more experienced, perhaps, colleagues, retired judicial officers. I would take some of the load off the bench that exists now because they got more than enough work to do, but build in some process whereby you're not just allowed to run amok on discovery. You're not just allowed to paper the town with subpoenas and do 35 depositions, which we all know maybe one or two of them is really relevant to what's going on. And we all have strategies, and we all know how to put pressure on people and try to get people into the fold and to agree and to get to yes, so to speak. And some of those tactics are just not productive. And so again, long-winded way, Dan, of saying, there have to be tools at the beginning of the case before things go off the rails, so that we are forced to have meaningful conversations, sometimes supervised, because some of us just aren't capable of having those conversations, good, bad, or ugly. And I don't know what that looks like exactly, but I know there are a lot of judges thinking about it. I know Judge Pellman, as she comes into her position, and you're going to talk to her next month, something I will absolutely tune in on and suggest everyone do. She has some great ideas from her experience, I think, about the kinds of things that could happen, but she's stuck as well with budgetary issues and workload issues and two-tier of justice issues. And how do we bring the bar in to help more take some of that pressure off, whether it's on DV or other issues. So again, there's no easy answer, and every answer has, like 35 reasons why not, but that doesn't mean you don't have the conversation and try to make that effort.
So looking away from the structural side of things and more back to your actual practice, what is the role of client management in helping to resolve cases? And how do you, with all of your experience, how have you learned is the best way to manage difficult clients or clients with unreasonable expectations or just wrong expectations?
What's the phrase? Get in early and often. I am guilty of not identifying some of those issues early enough in a case sometimes. My assistant is better at it than I am. Sometimes, we'll have a meeting with somebody and she'll be like, don't even think about it. That is not a person, because she talks to people sometimes off the record, with people I'm thinking about working with. Everyone deals with this in our practice in a different way. I think, by the way, the vast majority of my colleagues, both in my firm and elsewhere, are very good at managing. We joke and say, oh, so-and-so's crazy. I'm like, well, I do crazy. I can manage crazy. Sometimes I can and sometimes I can't. And I think the way to manage it is, like I said, early and often. Blunt, honest appraisals of what's going on. Blunt, honest appraisals, because those are in the best interest of your client, to say, not only should you not do this because it might be a bad thing, vis-a-vis, stupid, obvious example, I'm going to tell her that I'm going to take the kids unless she gives me the financial benefit I want. No, that's not going to work. Number one, it's awful. It's not child-centered. And if you say that to anyone outside the context of this particular attorney-client privilege conversation we're having, you're going to get shot down. No judge is going to tolerate that. No practitioner should tolerate that. And guiding the conversation, guiding the thought process in respectful ways, because again, people come to our offices and to our practices with a lifetime of whatever they got. The relationships, the lack of relationships, the lack of integrity, the abandonment issues, the honesty and betrayal issues, all that kind of stuff. That's why I think most of us are pretty adept at compartmentalizing. I say to people all the time, I am an ill-trained and very expensive therapist. So let's talk about potentially the need for that for you as the client. But it's all about managing in a very honest but respectful way early on the crazy or the unreal or the unrealistic. And look, those of us who've been doing it a long time, we kind of know where things are going to go. Look, there's a lot of discretion in the court, a lot of discretion in the law, on a lot of issues. I respect that. I think it's a good thing because the fact patterns and the histories and the dynamic are so different. But I think we have to, as practitioners, sit back and say, Am I just going to be a mouthpiece for crazy? And again, I don't think that's effective. And I think that if you do take that perspective into court, you are undermining your client's best interest, undermining the case's best interest, because the judge is not going to take you seriously. The judge knows when the lawyer is being overreaching. The judge knows when you don't have the facts, you don't have the law, you're creating something that is just not going to work. So those are the cases. If you're a smart lawyer and a good lawyer, you're having the conversation with your clients. You're like, we need to move this somewhere else. I want my day in court. Well, you kind of don't. Here's why. I mean, let's really talk about it. So, just honest and full-throated appraisal of where things are and what's realistic has to happen early.
So we only have a couple minutes left. We want to spend, you're gonna have to come back because we wanted to spend a lot of time talking about your experience overseas in international law and do kind of like a comparative law thing. Of course, we didn't get to any of that. And in the time we have left, I want to kind of go back to where we started with optimism and positivity. I get the sense that you are excited about the future of the practice and the future of the bar and the young lawyers coming up. But what else gets you excited? The community engagement. I want to hear a little bit about Dance LA too, because I know that's on the newer side of things for you relative to everything we've talked about. So take whatever pieces of that as a prompt that you want, and tell us what keeps you going now.
I'll make it brief because I know we only have a few minutes. But before I do that, this is the International Family Law Journal that I contribute to, that a bunch of people here contribute to. A guy named James Stewart out of London, all over the world. Just telling you, that's the CLE part of this. You have questions. This is such a great. Again, I feel like I'm like hawking wares, right? Buy my book. It's not my book. Buy it anyway. There's a link also to some information from it. The diversity of the experience. When I was working at Buhai and volunteering on the board, doing board work, I was president of the board, whatever. That's a great, as I said, a great give back to the community and the world we live in. At some point, I said, after doing a lot of work with different organizations, loving the work that the AAML does and the foundation of the AAML does, loving what the IAFL does, loving their work and experience all over the world with them. It's really about a diversity of experience for ourselves. This is a tough profession. People burn out. There's plenty of work out there. If you take it all on, and I'm guilty of this sometimes, you will burn out. You need that diversity of experience. I wanted to do some non-legal work. I wanted to get involved. I travel. I love to travel. I love art. I love theater. I love all sorts of things that I love to do. But for my kind of more pseudo-professional, I became involved with this group, which at the time was called the Gabriella Foundation. It's now called Everybody Dance LA. Amazing organization, teaches kids dance and structure and organization and passion and creativity to a group of disadvantaged, several thousand disadvantaged kids every year. Started many years ago by our former colleague, Eliza Bercovici, when she tragically lost her daughter, Gabriella. And she started, and she has created, and through the work of Liza and others, they've created this amazing organization. Well, the point is, before you burn out on what you do for a living, before you burn out on the burdens of this practice, which I tend to think are a blessing in lots of ways, but also can be very difficult, I suggest finding something like Everybody Dance LA, or some outlet where you take your lawyer and perhaps your lawyerly creativity, you bring a lot of that positivity and that structure, whatever that left brain, right brain thing is, into a different environment. It challenges you, it helps the community. And I say this about Buhai, I say this about Everybody Dance LA, I say this about a lot of organizations that a lot of us work with. It's multi-generational. You are giving back to the community, helping kids, helping families. And I say that about our own practice as well. What we do in our practice and how we work with families and how we work for the benefit of kids in many, many cases, it's multi-generational. It will change the dynamic of that family for generations, good, bad, or ugly, hopefully to the good. And the same thing happens, I think, with the application of our not insignificant efforts in think groups like Everybody Dance LA. So thank you for letting me make the plug. But whether it's that group or anything else, I just think that outlet is without question an amazing benefit, also to maintain the sanity and the interest and the passion for the practices on a day-to-day basis.
Well, a really powerful reminder that we all need a balance and something else besides our day-to-day practice that can actually help people is sort of the perfect way to end our conversation. So thank you so much for your time today.
Well, thank you. Thank you guys for this opportunity.
We had a lot of fun. Everyone who's logging off, please, before you do, mark your calendars and join us for our next episodes. They're all at 12:30. Judge Amy Pellman will be on March 2nd, Ron Brodt on April 6th, Dan Jaffe on May 4th, Alexandra Leichter on June 1st, and then Kendra Thomas and Gina Kang on July 6th. Thank you to Genna, Yael, and Belinda at the bar, and the Family Law Executive Committee, which is led by Gina Kang and Kendra Thomas, and all of our sponsors. And that's it.
Thanks, Larry.
Thank you guys very much.